This video discusses plot points from a number of different stories. For the spoiler-averse, each section is timestamped. The video is also better viewed on Nebula. The composer Pauline Oliveros, known for her deep experimental electronic music, died in November of 2016. But 5 years later, in December of 2021, I watched, in person, her last breath. Shortly before she died, Oliveros exhaled into a paper bag, a full lungful of air, the same kind of exhalation she'd used to play her music for 75 years. She then cinched the bag closed and handed it off to the artist Rafael Lozano-Hemmer. Years later, I saw that breath. I saw it breathed back and forth between that same paper bag and a mechanical bellows, endlessly recirculating this preserved record of her life. A digital counter ticked up by 1 with every breath. I watched it go from 267,301 to 267,302. The whole thing seems remarkably fragile, which I think is part of the point. Transparent respiration tubing attached to a paper bag with seemingly no more than a rubber band. And yet here, in this shuddering thing attached to a wall, was a fraction of a person's life, still inhaling and exhaling, still breathing. There is a you that remains and remains. The installation, fittingly titled Last Breath, was part of a larger exhibit by Lozano-Hemmer, focused on the presence, the impact, of our words and breath. It also included, for example, a steel sculpture of the air turbulence created by speech, the exact shape of the phrase Au clair de la lune, by the light of the moon, a French folk song that also happens to be the first human voice ever recorded. A piece called Atmosphonia, with an array of thousands of speakers playing countless field recordings simultaneously. Walking through was like an ever-shifting cacophony, like hearing the recorded id of the world. And, both held in a glass vial and floating through the ventilation of the exhibit itself, hundreds of thousands of nanopamphlets, specks of gold 150 atoms thick, set free into the air so they would be harmlessly inhaled and exhaled by each visitor to the art. Each nanopamphlet was nearly invisibly engraved with words from the same source, one chapter of one treatise by the mathematician Charles Babbage, on the permanent impression of our words and actions on the globe we inhabit. Calling Babbage simply a mathematician is probably doing him a disservice. A more accurate term might be polymath, or as he is widely known, the father of the computer. In 1822, he built a small prototype of a difference engine, the first automated mechanical calculator, the first mechanical computer. For the next 20 years, he would work on a much larger model, one that would weigh 4 tons and contain nearly 25,000 parts, capable of calculating with 16-digit numbers. It was never completed, nor were any other non-prototype versions of Babbage's machines. And yet, in 1837, while failing to complete his 4-ton machine, Babbage dreamed of something bigger still. He imagined, as Lozano-Hemmer's exhibit is named after, atmospheric memory. The pulsations of the air, once set in motion by the human voice, cease not to exist with the sounds to which they gave rise, he wrote. When you speak, he meant, your voice is an aerial pulse that continues to impact the air around it long after its sound has dissipated. These aerial pulses, unseen by the keenest eye, unheard by the acutest ear, unperceived by human senses, are yet demonstrated to exist by human reason. Even if we cannot see them, hear them, sense them, we know they must exist. Every atom of the atmosphere, he wrote, is infinitesimally altered by each aerial pulse. Each alteration will continue to influence each atom's path through their future existence. And so, what if, he theorized, what if we had the capability to sense and calculate the motion of each of these atoms? A being possessed of unbounded knowledge of that science could trace the minutest consequence of that primary impulse. Such a being would be able clearly to trace its future but inevitable path. If you could see the movement of every particle in the atmosphere, he says, you could see not just where it is, but where it came from, and more so where it's going, the past and the future contained in every speck of air. What a strange chaos is this wide atmosphere we breathe. Every atom impressed with good and with ill retains at once the motions which philosophers and sages have imparted to it, mixed and combined in 10,000 ways with all that is worthless and base. The air itself is one vast library, on whose pages are forever written all that man has ever said or woman whispered. There, in their mutable but unerring characters, mixed with the earliest as well as with the latest sighs of mortality, stand forever recorded, vows unredeemed, promises unfulfilled, perpetuating in the united movements of each particle the testimony of man's changeful will. Babbage's writing about this is extraordinary. You can almost feel him reeling as the chapter goes on, expanding the ramifications of this understanding of the world and its memory. But if the air we breathe is the never-failing historian of the sentiments we have uttered, earth, air, and ocean are the eternal witnesses of the acts we have done. No motion impressed by natural causes or by human agency is ever obliterated. The track of every canoe, of every vessel which has yet disturbed the surface of the ocean, whether impelled by manual force or elemental power, remains forever registered in the future movement of all succeeding particles which may occupy its place. God, you realize, reading the chapter, to calculate every atom, every particle, its path forward and backward, is the infinite intelligence wielded by God. And accordingly, the end of this section, the finale of the permanent impression of our words and actions on the globe we inhabit, regards our eternal judgment. Babbage, strikingly, chooses the example of a slaver throwing an imprisoned slave into the sea to lighten his ship, a crime rarely witnessed and even more rarely prosecuted. But if the very atoms of the earth record the movement derived from this crime, then the earth itself has witnessed it. The soul of the drowned man will need no living witness of his earthly agony, Babbage says. When man and all his race shall have disappeared from the face of our planet, ask a dying victim. Confront the murderer with every corporeal atom of his immolated slave, and in its still quivering movements, he will read the prophet's denunciation. It's electrifying reading, a united vision of the world and its constituent parts in which the past never disappears and the future is just waiting to be understood, all based on the compounding effects of every action in history. There is a nearness, and its gravity is echoing. But despite the breadth of his vision, despite culminating in a description of a final judgment of a crime after the end of all mankind, there's a step Babbage seems reluctant to take. If, as he says, perfect knowledge of the earth and its particles would allow you to trace its future but inevitable path, then that would imply that the actions of everything, everyone on earth, are also inevitable. He's describing a deterministic universe in which everything that's happened or will happen is the only thing that could have happened. Where in this equation is free will? Babbage is reluctant to address it. In fact, even though a later chapter in the book is titled Reflections on Free Will, he opens said chapter by declaring he won't theorize on the question of if humans have, free will. His vivid picture of a crime judged long after both perpetrator and victim have died is an odd one. If the actions of the perpetrator were long before predetermined by the position of the particles of the earth, what does guilt mean in a world where every action has already been determined, in a world where every future crime already lurks in the swirling memory of the planet itself?
Cause precedes effect. Effect leads to cause. The future is fixed in exactly the same way as the past.
This question of how humanity could possibly adapt to the knowledge of a predetermined future is at the center of Alex Garland's 2020 series, Devs. Devs is the name of an ultra-secret, ultra-advanced core of developers in the fictional tech company Amaya, basically the equivalent to the most hidden project of Apple or Google. In the Devs building, in a lab so removed from its surroundings that it literally hovers inside an unbroken vacuum seal, they build Babbage's impossible machine.
How many qubits is it running?
A number that seems pointless to express as a number.
The computer, extrapolating outward from a single object, becomes the being possessed of unbounded knowledge Babbage wrote of, a system that can trace every particle not only backward, but forward, see both Christ on the cross and the path a person will walk a month before they do. It can take a bag full of breath, and from it, describe the entire life of the person who breathed into it. In one of the show's most memorable scenes, a group of people watch the machine project the exact room they're in 1 second in the future. Each stares, horrified, unable to stop themselves from mirroring the actions they've just seen their future selves perform. Conversations with the devs team, then, feel like conversations with maddeningly smug gods, beings who have already watched the future transpire and can't help but condescend to those who still cling to ideas of personal agency.
Name a random event. Take a moment, think about it. And then name one. Meteors landing. Roulette wheels spinning. Misfortune suffered. They can all be unraveled. You can't name a random event because there are no random events.
And yet, this view of time as a block universe, as a form of eternalism, isn't motivated by impassive physics, but a selfish need for absolution. Forrest, the CEO of Amaya, the lead of Devs, watched his family die in a car crash, a collision that he feels horribly, irrationally responsible for. The guilt consumes him. Or it would, rather, unless he conceptualized the entire universe as one in which all time has effectively already happened, that his family's death was just as set in stone as the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. Unlike Babbage, who saw atmospheric memory as a way of rendering a verdict upon the long-past guilty, Forrest views that same fatal inevitability as morally freeing. Cause precedes effect. Effect follows cause. There is no universe in which his family is not hit by that car. This idea, this need for a deterministic universe, grows from the pain of needing to explain the cruelty of fate. He creates a god in the computer that offers the same reassurance as any other god. Everything happens for a reason. This is a special way of being afraid. No trick dispels. Because of this, any hint of variation, of flexibility within the Earth's memory is irreconcilable with Forrest's rationalization of time. He grows furious at a tech who implements code based on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, because if many worlds exist, if all possible worlds exist, that means he's simply been damned to live in one without his family. If the particles projected backwards, the one he uses to watch his simulationally resurrected daughter, contain potential timelines in which she still lives, then the universe once again becomes cruel and random, and a place where our actions are, in some way, our own. If time is malleable, if there is a branch that continues diverging, then he and his fellow developers cannot be gods. God would not play dice with the universe. The physical universe was a language with a perfectly ambiguous grammar. Every physical event was an utterance that could be parsed in two entirely different ways, one causal and the other teleological, both valid, neither one disqualifiable, no matter how much context was available. A teleological understanding of the world is an understanding based on results. It is a school of thought that starts at an effect and moves backward, using the end result to understand the causes. It is, in a sense, how the dev's computer, or Babbage's being of infinite intelligence, would view history. Start at the present and move backwards, learning each effect by its ensuing cause. It is also the core of how Dr. Louise Banks learns to think, as described in Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life, the short story eventually adapted into Denis Villeneuve's film Arrival. Story of Your Life centers around Louise's interactions with a visiting alien species, using her skills as a linguist to try and understand their written language. She's initially puzzled by why the aliens write the way they do. She notes, for example, that they construct entire sentences simultaneously rather than word by word. But those minor challenges belie a far more fundamental difference in perception. The aliens, she eventually realizes, do not perceive time as a linear progression from past to future. Instead, she says they understand all points in time teleologically. She says they see a period of time as a sequence with a requirement that must be met. One had to know the initial and final states to meet that goal. One needed knowledge of the effects before the causes could be initiated. In spending more and more time with the language, Louise learns to see the universe this way too, its grammar shifting her fundamental understanding of movement through time. She ceases to perceive chronology as moving smoothly from cause to effect. Instead, she describes herself as flipping through the Book of Ages, a chronicle that contains both the past and future. But what separates Louise from Forrest or the devs team is her motivation. She does not desire an omniscient view of the destiny of all things or the ability to rationalize that which haunts her. She says, quite simply, that reading from the Book of Ages creates a new sense of responsibility. What if the experience of knowing the future changed a person? What if it evoked a sense of urgency, a sense of obligation to act precisely as she knew she would? What distinguishes the aliens' mode of awareness is not just that their actions coincide with history's events, it is also that their motives coincide with history's purposes. They act to create the future, to enact chronology. The separation from devs is twofold. One, the concept of free will is not contradicted by the aliens' language. They just can't be held in one's head simultaneously. Louise compares it to the illusion of the young woman and the old crone. Neither perception is wrong, they just can't be seen at the same time. Those who don't know the future do have free will. Those who do have the knowledge can't act to change it. That's because of the second difference from devs. Knowledge of the future cannot be used selfishly, because the changed perception of time coincides with a simultaneous understanding of a higher purpose. Louise now exists to create the events she knows will come to pass. In devs, Forrest basically wills his deterministic computer into existence because he can't bear to lose his daughter. In Story of Your Life, Louise chooses to have a daughter, even though, in a sense, because she knows that daughter will die. Why wouldn't she? Everything in her life, everything in history, has brought her to this moment. There is an us, with a pattern we are threading. But even Louise's knowledge has limits. She says her memories used to grow like a column of cigarette ash laid down by the combustion of her consciousness. Now, with her immersion into the alien language, memories fell into place like giant blocks measuring years in duration. But she still can just barely grasp her life as the aliens would, as a half-century-long ember burning outside time. She couldn't quite see the moments in history that led to her life, the moments of the future that would only occur after her death. It's probably for the best. How could that knowledge not be completely overwhelming? Literature's most famous non-linear protagonist is likely Billy Pilgrim, unwitting lead of Kurt Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse-Five. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time, it begins. We already knew it would begin this way, because the novel reveals both its first and last lines in the prologue. Billy Pilgrim is born in 1922. He is sent to Germany in 1944. He survives the firebombing of Dresden in 1945. He returns to America, is married, has a son and a daughter. He gives a speech and is assassinated via laser gun in 1976. And sometime in the middle, he is abducted and brought to the planet Tralfamadore by aliens who experience all of time simultaneously. Unlike the aliens of Story of Your Life or the quantum computing wizardry of devs, the Tralfamadorians seem purpose-built to not be taken seriously. They're little plunger-shaped guys with one eye that's also a hand at the top of their body, and yet they too have an omniscient view of history, their perspective stretching backwards to the beginning of time and forwards to the extinction of the universe. Billy says that the Tralfamadorians can look at the different moments of the past, present, and future the way we might look at a stretch of the Rocky Mountains, each moment as permanent as the next. It is just an illusion we have here on Earth, he says, that once a moment is gone, it is gone forever. And Billy, too, lives in the past, present, and future simultaneously. In the perception of his life, cause does not need to precede effect. Maybe most strange, in comparison with our other examples, is that in Slaughterhouse-Five, Billy's unstuckness in time isn't because of an interaction with the aliens. He detaches from linear time far before his abduction, during a particularly unpleasant march through German territory in World War II. The Tralfamadorians simply help him understand what he's going through. And mostly, what Billy is going through is death. Death after pointless death. People killed on hunting trips, in elevators, on planes, incinerated by firebombs, suffocated by carbon monoxide, exploded by tanks, assassinated by laser guns. The book's most recurrent phrase is a Tralfamadorian mantra, repeated in the presence of the dead. For them, death is just one of a series of equally viable moments. It requires no mourning. They simply say, so it goes. Billy's dad is shot by his friend. So it goes. Christ dies on the cross. So it goes. A champagne bottle loses all of its bubbles. So it goes. The Tralfamadorians are experimenting with new fuel sources for their flying saucers, and they accidentally blow up the universe. So it goes. Rather than expose Billy to a new way of thinking, the aliens of Slaughterhouse-Five simply justify his sleepwalk through existence, his complete dissociation from the traumas of war. If everyone killed is still alive, and every city turned to ash is still standing at a different point in time, there is no need to mourn, or grapple with complicity, or try and avoid those horrors in the future. When a Tralfamadorian sees a corpse, all he thinks is that the dead person is in a bad condition in that particular moment, but that the same person is just fine in plenty of other moments. Now, when I myself hear that somebody is dead, I simply shrug and say what the Tralfamadorians say about dead people, which is, so it goes. There's no point in mourning, because somewhere, sometime, that person is still exhaling. For Billy, it's an understandable reaction to the inhuman levels of suffering he was exposed to. As a worldview, the book wants us to understand, it's a ludicrously cynical way of experiencing reality. The same level of importance attached to a dead dog, a bottle of champagne, the death of a man on TV, the death of 100,000 in an incinerated city. So it goes, repeated more than 100 times throughout the novel. So it goes, often multiple times a page. There is no resistance in Billy's view. It's Forrest's absolved guilt without Louise's wisdom, Babbage's divine knowledge without responsibility to the divine or the terrestrial. This is what the abdication of the self to the course of time looks like, sitting back and letting history drive over you. "1,000 Times Resist," the debut title from developer Sunset Visitor, is rooted in the years between 2035 and 2047. Or maybe it's 2019. Or maybe it's the year 3000 or 4000 or some year so large it's pointless to express as a year. 1,000 Times Resist exists within and apart from all of these eras, a story in which history coexists with the present. Fittingly, it's hard to know where to start in describing the game. In 2036, Iris and her parents move into an apartment in Vancouver. In 2019, Iris's parents are targeted by Hong Kong police after participating in the territory's massive protests. In 2047, an alien life form named an Occupant emerges at Iris's high school dance. Subsequently, every student present quite literally cries themselves to death. Everyone except Iris. 1,000 or multiple thousands of years later, after every other human on Earth has died from the same disease, Iris, undying, immune, has deemed herself All-Mother and presides over a colony of clones of herself, the god of a community quite literally created in her image. I told you it was hard to know where to start. So, the Occupant, I suppose. An alien, one that, like in Story of Your Life, communicates in a fundamentally different way than humans do. The Occupants reference memory to each other, a shared memory with collectively perfect recall. When the Occupants tried to do this with humans, the resulting swell of emotion from so many simultaneously surfacing memories overwhelmed people's ability to deal with them, hence crying themselves to death. The Occupants don't really view this as a negative outcome, though, because they absorbed the perfect memory of all those dead people into themselves, an absolute and comprehensive record of their life. And so, in the Occupants' view, no people really died at all. The story of 1000 Times Resist is experienced as a whirlwind tour of this memory, the player and protagonists whisked into scenes decades apart in the blink of an eye. The central hook of the game asks us to understand the why of now, based on countless past events, from the arrival of the aliens to the loneliness of one girl to any individual drop of rain. We, the players and the protagonists, are shown scene after scene from all points in time. Iris's childhood, the clones' power struggle, the downfall of civilization. But perhaps because the human mind can't handle centuries of perfect recall, or perhaps because the cascading showers of history are too complex for even the Occupants to keep straight, time begins to fall in on itself. In 2019, Iris's parents are attacked by police during a protest, the largest demonstrations in Hong Kong's history. Some 1,000 years later, a clone named Blue bombs the fascistic provisional government set up in the All-Mother's absence. There's a lot going on in this game. And as Blue flees from the explosion, under attack by a militarized police force, her reality veers wildly into Hong Kong, a place she's never been, a city that, in Blue's timeline, doesn't exist anymore. The guards attack Blue, and the cops attack Iris's parents, and history doesn't just rhyme, it folds, held by the Occupants and by us, the players, as a simultaneous expression of rebellion across time and space. The machine cycles Oliveros' breath because she once breathed into a paper bag. Oliveros exhales into a paper bag because one day, the machine will do it for her. Those folds in time are the only methods of communication between us and them, human and occupant. Conversations happen through opaque two-part poems, started by one party, finished by the other, their meaning only drawn from the historical context collectively preserved in memory. But in these conversations, it's unclear if the Occupants are willing to allow anything new. How much of their existence is just rerunning the past over and over until its memory supplants the future? Endlessly repeated mantras, a nearness and its echoing gravity, a you that remains and remains, a branch that continues diverging, acts of rebellion, crackdowns of violence, mothers disappointed in their daughters, disappointed in their daughters, disappointed in their daughters, sleepwalking back into hell again and again. And how much of that cycle can truly be blamed on the Occupants? Sure, these are aliens that retain all memories, but doesn't everything bear the impression of history too? The water, the air, the earth, our genetics? How much newness will any of that memory allow? The resist in 1000 Times Resist is a resistance of this seemingly inescapable gravity of the past, a force that must be fought tooth and nail and still, so often, folds back in on itself. In perhaps the game's best scene, Iris's mother succumbs to this gravity. I regret leaving Hong Kong, she says, regrets the mess they left behind. What was the point? Fighting for freedom, the 5 demands, it was a mistake. All it did was expedite the end, brought their fist down harder, faster. A seemingly predetermined outcome, no matter the millions against it. But her dad disagrees beautifully. The world watched it all happen, heard our voices, saw us bleed. If we stayed silent, they would say, this is how it always was. They would say, this is what the people wanted. They can't say that. It has gone down in history that we fought for a different future until we couldn't. If memory is what determines the future, as 1,000 Times Resist asks over and over, doesn't that make it even more vital to place your stamp upon it? If history is just the refreshed or regurgitated pieces of the past, then how can you let the now that will someday fade into then be defined by anyone else? There is a now, and you are in it. There is a then, and you'll receive it. In the early 20th century, Werner Heisenberg and Niels Bohr, among others, shattered the idea of Babbage's perfect machine. Charles Babbage once believed that with enough knowledge, we could trace the particles of the universe into the future as well as the past. Heisenberg et al. Replaced this idea with uncertainty. Their claim was that the quantum realm operated fundamentally differently than the rest of our world, that there, in the base of physics, effects ceased to be consistently explained by their causes. Benjamin Labatut writes, if everything that occurred was the direct consequence of a prior state, then merely by looking at the present and running the equations, it would be possible to achieve a godlike knowledge of the universe. These hopes were shattered in light of Heisenberg's discovery. What was beyond our grasp was neither the future nor the past, but the present itself. Not even the state of one miserable particle could be perfectly apprehended. In the deepest substrate of all things, physics had not found solid, unassailable reality, but a domain born of the whims of a many-armed goddess toying with chance. Other physicists opposed fiercely. Albert Einstein refused to believe an aspect of the world could be truly, fundamentally random. He declared famously that God would not play dice with the universe. He said there must be some hidden variable, something we were missing, that would restore consistency to our world. And yet, in nearly a century, no true hidden variables have been found. The most fundamental building blocks of physics remain resolutely, infuriatingly, non-deterministic. I once watched a documentary called Geographies of Solitude. It was about Sable Island, a tiny strip of land off the coast of Canada, and an environmentalist who had lived on and with the island for 40 years. The environmentalist, a woman named Zoe Lucas, collected things washed up on the beach, plastics, toys, threads, and among them, balloons. Balloons that are strangely unstuck in time. Green and red for Christmas, red and white for Canada Day, balloons celebrating that it's a boy or it's a girl, and more, and farther back, and stranger and more specific, decades spent drifting on the waves. Balloons for bowling alleys, balloons for mayoral campaigns, balloons bearing outdated logos, disconnected phone numbers. She said she once found a balloon attached to a note from a family in Lafayette, Indiana, 1,400 miles away. Earth, air, and ocean, the eternal witnesses of the acts we have done. Lucas has been collecting for decades. How many lungs that once filled those balloons still breathe? How many people are survived by their refuse, painstakingly refound and cataloged by Lucas, their own unwitting last breath submitted to the wind? The thing about determinism is, if everything that happens is a predictable event, it gives your actions enormous weight. Whether the choice truly belongs to you or the flow of time, everything you do literally affects the future course of the universe. Every moment not yet happened is supported by what's happening in this one right now. And the thing about non-determinism is, if the future is not yet set, it gives your actions enormous weight. Yes, the entire history of the world is still behind you when you choose something, but the unwritten history of the future hinges on the thing you do now, because the future is a twisting, roiling thing turning on every new piece of information. We cannot see the tracks we are laying for ourselves, our families, the people and the creatures we'll share the globe with. The tracks we arrive on disappear into the fog of the past. Even the techiest of proposals for foresight and hindsight, the Devs and the Babbages, hew much closer to wizardry than science. To imagine time as somehow already complete fundamentally clashes with our existence. The privilege is so often given to aliens because it is, in a way, a relinquishment of the human experience. Maybe it is also human to second guess, to doubt, to wonder time and again if we're really supposed to be on this particular track. Maybe that's why we keep telling these stories. I cannot know when, I cannot know how, but that endless cycle that contains Pauline Oliveros' last breath will someday falter. Maybe the bag will split, maybe the tubing will tear, or the machine will break down. The history of her, previously encased in an exhibit, will disappear into the atmosphere. And in time, instead of a machine, it will be breathed in by me, and you, and every person on the planet. We will carry that last breath into the future. The process of researching this essay was exhausting. The script is about 11 pages long, and my notes are twice that length. At one point, I had way more about quantum mechanics. I considered including Dr. Manhattan or Richard Maguire's graphic novel Here. At one point, I was going to use a fog machine to do something. The best part of the research, however, was rewatching the series Devs, which now comfortably sits among my favorite TV shows ever. In fact, I had so many thoughts about the series that I joined forces with one of my favorite video essayists, Leo Vader, and recorded an entire video on all the things the show makes us think about. That video is an hour and 15 minutes long, and it's only available on Nebula. If you've seen Devs, I think you'll love this, and if you have no interest in Devs, this is the best way to hear about all the cool stuff that show does. I feel like I've seen another example of this. Oh, you know what it is, actually? It's my favorite, one of my favorite scenes in a movie, which is the scene in Mulholland Drive.
When he's talking to his boss, Katie, and he's like, if this works, it changes literally every single thing that we've ever known. And then she says, if it works, it doesn't change anything. That's the entire point.
Nebula is home to an enormous amount of exclusive content from me. Shorter essays about horror games or quad wielding, longer process videos where I demonstrate everything from writing a script to video editing in Premiere, even cooking videos where I and my partner go pick blackberries. If you've never tried Nebula before, joining right now will give you hours and hours of exclusive videos, literally years worth of stuff from me that's just been waiting there for you to join. And somehow, all of that costs less than $3 a month when you sign up for a year with my 40% off code. I would say the price of a cup of coffee, but there's nothing that costs less than $3 anymore, except, somehow, Nebula. And after the dozen hours it'll take you to get through all my Nebula stuff, you can move on to the countless other exclusives on the site. Bloopers and script notes from Leo Vader, for instance. Essays unimpeded by predatory copyright claims, like those from Big Joel. Both Abigail Thorne and Patrick Willems are making upcoming films. Jesse Gender has already dropped one, and all of those, I should remind you, have 0 ads. 2 months of YouTube Premium or a year of Nebula. Your choice. Support me, join a better streaming service, and catch my exclusive spoiler-filled chat about devs only on Nebula. Get an entire year for only $30, a 40% discount, by signing up with my code in the description.